I think we can start our program. We welcome all of you to this discussion and conversation with the private sector on the opportunities for the East African community, private sector, that they can tap from the African Continental Free Trade Area. Let us start our program right now. My name is Didier Habimana. I'm the Communications Officer at UN Economic Commission for Africa in the Office for Eastern Africa. Let me start by thanking the heads of East African Business Council, the CEO, Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, and also the head of ECA in Eastern Africa, Dr. Mama Keita, for convening this conversation with the private sector. And also let me recognize all the invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, representatives from different private sector federations in the region. Let me also welcome you all to this conversation. Let me take you through the program. I'll take you through the program, and then after that, we will just show a short video that is talking about private sector and African Continental Free Trade Area, and then later on we will kickstart the program. So the program is starting with John Bosco Kalisa, the CEO of East African Business Council. He's the one who is going to do the opening remarks together with Dr. Mama Keita, who is the director of ECA in Eastern Africa. And then we'll follow a presentation by Dr. Rogers Mukwaya, who is an ECA's Economic Affairs Officer, on the CFTA implementation success in Eastern Africa. We will have a conversation, the conversation with Mr. Dennis Carrera, who is the chairman of East African Business Council, and also Mr. Davlin Busuru, who is the Policy and the Regulatory Compliance Analyst in KEPSA, Kenya Private Sector Alliance. We'll have also Mr. Stephen Asimwe, who is the Director for Advocacy in Private Sector Foundation in Uganda. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Mama Keita, who is, of course, the Director of ECA in Eastern Africa. So without further ado, let me ask the technical team to play a short video. It's about 3 minutes. And I will ask all of you to pay attention to that. And then let's watch together this short video. So over to the technical team.
It's time to implement the AfCFTA in East Africa. Trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA, began since the 1st of January 2021, with a market of 1.3 billion people and a combined gross domestic product of $2.5 trillion. Time to implement.
Can you confirm that the video is on? Can someone confirm with me?
Yes, Didier.
With the
yes,
technical
Didier.
team?
Yes, Didier, we can see the video. Okay.
It is, we can see.
It's time to implement the AfCFTA in East Africa. Trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Yes, Didier, we can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yes, me too.
Let me ask.
Yes, we can hear you, unless you cannot hear us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's start.
It's time to implement the AfCFTA in East Africa. Trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA, began since the 1st of January 2021, with a market of 1.3 billion people and a combined gross domestic product of $2.5 trillion. About 2/3 of African countries have thus far ratified the agreement and are full state parties to it. The elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers is expected to reduce the transaction costs and make trading within Africa easier and highly profitable. The AfCFTA aims to become a single unified continental market, attracting investments from around the world. This will be fostered by its various protocols on investment, competition, intellectual property rights, means of transactions and payments, e-commerce, conflict settlement modalities, and free movement of goods and people. Implementation of the agreement is expected to expand activities in all sectors, especially in agriculture and manufacturing. It will also boost the business environment, productivity, and competitiveness. The AfCFTA can fast-track Africa's industrialization process. For East Africa, the AfCFTA will facilitate companies and farmers to access rapidly growing markets across Africa. Access to inputs and skilled workforce will equally improve. It's a great opportunity to join regional value chains and expand business. There are also lots of opportunities for business operating in the service sector, as East Africa has the largest comparative advantage in services across Africa. African leaders have created the opportunity. The private sector needs to take over and start trading now. African enterprises must position themselves and satisfy the demand from consumers and firms in Africa. They need to produce goods and services in adequate quantity and quality. With effective implementation of the agreement, the private sector will competitively integrate into the global economy. At the same time, it will contribute major social goals such as increasing employment opportunities for our young people and promoting prosperity. The agreement clearly charts a path for lifting millions out of poverty. The role of the private sector is critical. Countries also must continue to ratify, as every stakeholder has a role to play. The UN Economic Commission for Africa will continue to support governments, the private sector, and civil society for a successful implementation of the AfCFTA. The Commission is also currently working with governments on the continent to develop national strategies for the implementation of the AfCFTA. It's time to implement the AfCFTA.
Yes, it is time to implement the CFTA. It's time to implement the CFTA, and permit me to really thank all the private sector representatives, everyone who is here in this webinar, who believes that it's time to implement the CFTA, as well as the conveners of this webinar. Let me, without further ado, ask Mr. Kalisa, the CEO of East African Business Council, to give us his opening remarks. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Didier. I really want to thank the team, the co-organizers from UNECA and EABC. Allow me, before I deliver opening remarks, first of all, recognize our Vice Chair of EABC, Dennis Carrera, and our focal point responsible for CFTA. Also recognize my sister, my good friend, my partner, Mama Keita, the director for UNECA Sub-Region Office based in Kigali. Our panelists.
Thank you, Bosco.
Yeah, our panelists from our national focal point, PSFU Uganda, KEPSA Kenya. All the participants that are joining this important webinar, where we are taking a stock in terms of progress of the implementation of the CFTA. let me start off saying that really I want to appreciate and acknowledge the support, the political support by our leaders, especially the leaders from EAC. So far, 5 partner states have ratified the agreement. This week, last week, we saw and we celebrated United Republic of Tanzania joining and ratifying the agreement. It's very exciting on our side, and we are also looking forward to see South Sudan joining. So what does it mean? When all the partner states in the EAC ratify the agreement, it provides opportunity for us to start trading. And I want to say that the EAC, EABC and EAC are fast-tracking some of the tariff offer to ensure that we achieve 90% tariff offer before the duration that we are accorded. So this event is going to highlight some of the opportunities, some of the challenges that related to the implementation of agreement. But let me say that the agreement presents more enormous opportunities than challenges. The opportunities related to market integration, the opportunities related to investment, cross-border investment, opportunities to uplift the number of our people, our citizens out of poverty, opportunities for job creation, and opportunities for building back better after the devastating impact of COVID. So it is going to be really an exciting, and I'm happy that we are launching this today, and we are taking the leading role in terms of the launch. So EABC is partnering with UNECA, and this is now done in Kigali, but we have agreed we are going to roll out this sensitization and engagement across our partner states, all 6 partner states. So without any further ado, I want really to thank Mama Keita and the entire team, and also EABC board and management to ensure that we have this kind of framework where we're going to work together in terms of implementing the CFTA. So without any further ado, I want to thank everyone, all the participants on this call, and I want to wish you a very fruitful deliberation. And I want also to assure our commitment to engage and our commitment from the board and management of the EABC to fast track some of the elements related to CFTA. So thank you and have a productive day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kalisa, for the opening remarks. Before we continue, let me just remind everyone here on the call in this webinar some of the ground rules. If you can turn off our webcam and mute our microphones when it's not our time to speak. Kindly let's turn off our webcam and mute our microphones, and also we wait our turn. We will also have time to ask questions or to contribute to this discussion, but also we can use the chat room, but we are not going to use the chat room for our personal water cooler, but we are going to use the chat room to do the follow-up questions to any discussion that is happening. So right now, let me invite my director, Dr. Keita, to have the floor and for the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didier. Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, my dear brother, CEO of the EABC, East African Business Council, to all your colleagues, Vice Chair, Mr. Dennis Carrera, to all the other colleagues from EABC, to our distinguished panelists this morning, to my own colleagues, to all the private sector community, a warm good morning. I'm really delighted of this opportunity to partner with EABC and to be in a conversation with the private sector. Because to us, the AfCFTA is really a game changer. We've done a lot of, conducted several studies, not only ECA, but many other, very respectable entities, all really unanimous about all the benefits of the AfCFTA. Benefit at the macroeconomic level, in terms of really promoting economic growth, reducing poverty, hunger, promoting more food security on the continent, dealing with underemployment and unemployment issues, really creating more decent jobs for our populations. Also improving the way we produce, really deepening and organizing better the regional value chains, improving intra-regional trade, of course, improving investment, exports, also a way of import, how we import. All those are the macroeconomic benefits, among the macroeconomic benefits of the AfCFTA, and really this is what we need to really change the structure of our economies. The promises are really that this agreement can help diversify our economies, promote more manufacturing, fasten the industrialization process, which is needed because, as we know, right now our growth model are really based on the export of a few number of commodities that are not well transformed and then that are not adding much value and then not really creating the decent job that we need to grow a middle class that also we need to sustain better welfare in our continent. So for us, again, it is a game changer, but who is at the center of that game change is really the private sector. It's important to engage in a conversation with the private sector to know what are the fears, what are the recommendations, the suggestions in terms of what needs to be done, what needs to be prioritized in order to make AfCFTA happen. And then really, we're happy to be doing this with EABC. And this is just the beginning of a series of conversations, hopefully, for us to understand what needs to be done and how we need to take which action. So again, thank you very much, my brother Bosco. Thank you to you and all colleagues. And thank you for your community, to the private sector community for joining us. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Rogers, who will really, provide us with some elements of some of the study that we have undertaken. We have undertaken study showing some of the benefits of the AfCFTA, but also some survey. You have conducted some survey within your community, the community of the private sector, to hear from them what are the benefits that they foresee, but what are the challenges, what are the fears. So let's hear from Rogers, and then we start the conversation from there. MC, allow me to give the floor to Rogers here. Rogers, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning and welcome to this presentation. My name is Rogers Mukwaya. I work with ECA as an Economic Affairs Officer, focusing mainly on trade and the CFTA. Now, my presentation this morning is going to be divided into 4 sections. So the first section of the presentation will deal with the state of the African economy and inter-regional trade. The second section will look at the goals and the expected benefits of the CFTA. And the third section will go into the CFTA implementation challenges. And in this section, we'll also look at the results of our survey. And last but not least will be the recommendations that we got from the survey. So as we discuss the CFTA, it is important to highlight some of the key economic trends that have happened over the last 1 year, specifically since 2020, since the onset of the COVID pandemic. So following the pandemic, growth in Africa shrank for the first time in decades. It shrank to 3.5%, almost in tandem with the world average. However, as you can see, this decline in growth was not uniform across Africa. Fortunately, even if we had problems in East Africa still came out as the best performing economy in Africa. Growth in East Africa was at 0.7%, which was the highest growth rate in Africa, compared to the lowest growth rate, which was experienced in Southern Africa of 7.0%. So you can see that the COVID pandemic had a negative impact on the development prospects of Africa. It increased unemployment, especially in sectors that were hard hit, like the services sector, tourism, and I think for East African countries, tourism is a big sector in all our economies. And we felt the impact on tourism. It increased poverty and worsened inequality across the region. Going forward, a rebound is expected this year, and it will be partly driven by a stronger global economy, rising exports, and higher commodity prices. So this year, the African economy is expected to grow at about an average of 3.6%. However, there are downsides to this outlook story. Some of the downside risks include the fact that there has been a slow vaccine rollout, especially in African countries, and there have been a lot of complaints from all our member states that while we have tried to import vaccines, while we've tried to buy the vaccines, the West and the rich countries have been, for lack of a better word, they've been hogging the vaccines. So, and this is why African countries have put in place several different programs trying to purchase vaccines, because we realize that without the vaccines, you cannot have this growth that we're talking about. Now, second risk we're looking at is higher food prices on the continent. An additional risk is the limited fiscal space. Coming into this crisis, a lot of African countries in the region were heavily indebted. Now, if you remember, when we had the first financial crisis in 2008, African countries fared well. And the reason they fared well was because they had a lot of fiscal space. They were not heavily indebted, and therefore they were able to cushion against the decline in growth. But coming into the COVID crisis, a lot of our countries were relatively heavily indebted, and following the COVID crisis, the debt situation has worsened in the region. So the elevated debt levels and the limited fiscal space are one of the big risks that could affect the outlook for the region. Now, regarding foreign direct investment inflows into Africa. Inflows to Africa declined by 15.6% in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic, of course. And the most affected countries were the commodity-dependent countries. Now, within our region, East Africa, Ethiopia was the best performer, receiving about $2.4 billion in investment. But even for them, this was down by 6% compared to what they received in 2019. And FDI to most SDG-related sectors fell, with only renewable energy as the outlier. It received 28% more FDI in 2020. So this tells us something about the opportunities for investment in the region. Renewable energy related to climate change presents an opportunity for increased investment in the region. So this is one of the areas that we need to focus on as we move forward into implementation of the CFTA. Now, regarding intra-African trade, prior to the crisis, intra-African trade was relatively stagnant and low. Intra-African trade had stagnated at about 16%. In the EAC, intra-African trade was at about 13%. Now, if you compare it to the other regions, we're still lagging. But intra-African trade has stagnated for a period in Africa. So even prior to the crisis, we had this issue. And we're hoping that the CFTA can help solve this problem. I think most of the studies that we have looked at, all the numbers that are coming out of the CFTA analysis show that a CFTA, like Dr. Keita said, will be a game changer for intra-African trade. And especially because intra-African trade is mainly industrialized trade. It's mainly taking place in manufacturing and processed foods. as opposed to trade flows from outside of Africa to the rest of the world, which are mainly taking place in extractive commodities. So what are the goals of and expected benefits of the CFTA? So in the next section of this presentation, I am going to take you through the goals and expected benefits of the CFTA. As you are aware, the CFTA aims to create a liberalized continental market for goods and services with free movement of persons. And the CFTA negotiations that have been ongoing have been divided into 3 phases, with the first phase focusing on protocols in trade, in goods and services, rules of origin, and settlement disputes. The first phase has been signed and is almost complete. I think what's pending is the finalization of the rules of origin. But that, I think by last month, about 80% of the rules of origin covered, 80% of the tariff lines had been finalized. So that discussion is progressing well. The next phase of, which is phase 2 of the CFTA negotiations, will cover intellectual property rights, investment and competition policy. And then the last phase, which is the third phase, will cover negotiations on e-commerce and digital trade. And I cannot re-emphasize how important e-commerce is. COVID has shown us, if we were doubting the importance of digital trade, e-commerce, COVID has taught us how important digital trade is. Going forward, you cannot be competitive without e-commerce and digital trade. So talking about next, I will discuss the liberalization of the tariff lines. How will the process take place? Liberalization will be gradual, with 90% of the tariff lines liberalized over 10 years for low developed countries, LDCs like, for example, Uganda will have 10 years to liberalize 90% of its tariff lines, compared with Kenya, which will have 5 years to liberalize 90% of its tariff lines. And then after 3 years, you'll have 97% of tariff lines liberalized for LDCs. So what are the estimated benefits across the continent? What are the benefits of the CFTA? As our director pointed out, there's been a lot of research done on the benefits, estimated benefits of the CFTA. And looking at what will happen to African GDP, it is estimated that the CFTA will boost African GDP by about up to $450 billion. That is once the CFTA is fully implemented. So this should cover a period of up to, after 10 years, we would see this benefit to African GDP. It is also expected that the CFTA will boost intra-regional trade, intra-African regional trade by 52% and create 14 million new jobs, mainly in manufacturing, food processing, and the textile sector. Sorry, Didier, can you see my presentation? I have lost it.
Yes, we can.
But I've lost control of the presentation.
No, we can't see. We can't see the presentation.
We cannot see the slides.
Okay, let me try and reload them again. Can you see them now? Can you see the
Yes.
slide? Okay.
Yes.
So I was
Yes,
discussing the benefits, estimated benefits of the CFTA across the continent. And what I was saying that the CFTA, why we say the CFTA is a game changer is because most of the new jobs that are going to be created in sectors where you have high productivity, manufacturing and processed foods and textiles, as opposed to creating jobs in the agriculture sector, which we know is, sorry, has the presentation disappeared?
Yeah, it keeps on
Yes.
disappearing.
Yes, it's gone again.
You want me to play it from my side, Bridges?
Yeah, play it from your side, Didier. Thank you. So I was saying some of the CFTA is a game changer because of the sectors that benefit from the CFTA, manufacturing, textiles, and food processing. And this is especially important for Eastern Africa because in Eastern Africa, we produce a lot of agriculture. Now, the CFTA will boost processing in agriculture. This means that regional value chains in Eastern Africa we can develop strong regional value chains, which would be a benefit our farmers and create more decent jobs. Now, some of the other benefits that the CFTA will create include increased trade diversification. As I was saying, most of the intra-trade that will take place in the CFTA is not extractive trade. It's not related to minerals and commodities. Secondly, the CFTA has mechanisms for protecting women traders. We know that women traders make up over 70% of the informal cross-border traders, and they suffer from, it's been, research has shown that they do suffer from harassment, sexual harassment as they carry out cross-border trade. So the CFTA has mechanisms for protecting women traders. And then the CFTA will allow small medium enterprises in Africa to lower costs, lower trading and transaction costs, and allow them to take advantages of economies of scale. We know that SMEs make up about 80% of the African private sector. So it is important that we lower trade and transaction costs for these SMEs. And the last point I want to make about the included benefits is that the CFTA will boost sustainable growth. It will contribute both to the SDGs and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. So the CFTA is a game changer. So in the next slide, we show you some of the benefits, some of the sectors in Eastern Africa that will benefit from the CFTA. And you can see that textiles, heavy manufacturing, light manufacturing, and processed foods are the sectors that will benefit the most from the CFTA. And like I said, the last, if you look at the last, at the bottom of the slide, growth in extraction will be minimum compared to the other sectors. So the CFTA is a game changer in that it has managed to flip this chart. Normally, what has been happening in Africa is that growth has been driven by the items that we see at the bottom: extraction, grains and crops. But the CFTA is flipping this. Now, what we have is growth will be driven by sectors that have high productivity, and it will promote structure change in Eastern Africa. Next slide, please, Didier. Additionally, the CFTA will boost investment in the services sector. Looking at this chart, you can see we try to calculate profitability of the East African services sector in 2017. And you can see that For most sectors, you experience double-digit profitability. So this is already a lucrative services sector. So the CFTA will encourage investment into this sector. And this is timely because the services sector has taken a hit with COVID. So the CFTA in this sense will help the services sector recover from some of the hits that it has suffered due to COVID. Didier, the next slide. Thank you. So what are the CFTA challenges? What are the implementation challenges? So there are many hurdles to the effective implementation of the CFTA. There are several hurdles. And some of these hurdles include the complexity of the negotiations. A lot of countries don't have the capacity to successfully take part in some of these negotiations. And actually, one of the things we're doing at ECA is providing capacity for member states to negotiate, to be able to participate in these negotiations. So that's one of the ways we're trying to help member states go around this problem of complex negotiations. Another problem is the fact that there is poor inter-country transport infrastructure and insufficient networks. So for the CFTA to be successful, if you're going to have goods moving across Africa, if you're going to have services moving across Africa, if you're going to have e-commerce across Africa, you're going to need transport infrastructure, you're going to need digital infrastructure. And so poor infrastructure remains a challenge. And then another problem that is a hurdle to the implementation of the CFTA is the excessive bureaucracy, red tape, and the non-tariff barriers at the border. Fortunately, within the CFTA, there is a mechanism for controlling non-tariff barriers and making sure that they do not block the successful implementation of the CFTA. And last but not least is protectionism and the reluctance to liberalize certain sectors. So we've seen this in several trade agreements where certain sectors are considered sensitive sectors. So this will be one of the hurdles for the CFTA. Now, in this next slide, we look at the SMEs. We know that SMEs in Africa face a unique challenge. We already know that SMEs make up over 80% of the private sector in Africa, and yet they face very, very unique challenges. And some of these challenges include the lack of productive capacities that will prevent them from economies of scale. So without economies of scale, without being able to lower production costs, SMEs may not be able to take advantage of the CFTA. So we will need to build capacity in our SMEs to make sure that they can take advantage of the economies of scale that the CFTA will provide. And then we face high transaction and information costs. A lot of SMEs have very high transactions, whether it's in finance, whether it's information costs, whether it's trading costs. They face very high transaction and information costs, and this is a barrier to the successful implementation of the CFTA. A third point is the high levels of informality in business and trade. Within our region, we have very high levels of informal trade, and this presents both. It is a challenge because it presents direct competition to the SMEs, the registered SMEs, and secondly, with the informal sector, it becomes very hard to provide capacity building. It becomes very hard to provide trainings for and support to the private sector, most of the private sector, because they're in the informal sector, and it's hard to get their numbers. And then last but not least is that SMEs face limited access to credit. I think if you look at most East African countries, this is true for most East African countries. I think the prime lending rate for most of the East African countries is above 15%. If you're borrowing at above 15%, and your economy is growing at 6%, that means your business has to really outperform the economy in order for you to make a profitable venture. Next slide here, please. Thank you. Now, there is another group, before I go to the perception survey, there is another group that I will mention specifically. That is the women and the youth. Women and youth face very specific challenges. One is that women and youth are mainly operating in SMEs. They have small businesses. So they have all the problems that are associated with SMEs are associated with women and youth. Secondly, they face higher barriers to finance. Women and youth don't have access to credit because they lack the collateral. So this is a challenge for them. And many of them lack the skills needed to be competitive in an increasingly industrialized economy. And finally, the jobs that the women and youth do in the informal sector are very vulnerable to very low pay. And they have less savings to invest. So women and youth are a special group that the CFTA will pay attention to. How do we boost? We have to create jobs for the youth, not just jobs, but quality jobs. Because what we've seen over the last 10 years, African countries have experienced growth, but the kind of jobs that they have created have not been quality jobs. And so when things like COVID come around, these shocks, these negative shocks, lead to job losses because the jobs that were created in the first place were not quality jobs, not sustainable, and any kind of negative shock leads to unemployment. Now, this perception survey was carried out, was commissioned by the EAC private sector and ECA. And the objective of this the survey was to consult the private sector in the EAC to measure its perception on the level of awareness, the opportunities, constraints, and critical reforms needed to maximize the benefits of the CFTA. Next slide here. The survey was conducted last year between November and December 2020, and it involved a representation of the private sector across all EAC partner states: Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Uganda, and Tanzania. Now I'm going to present some of the broad results from the survey. There are more details within the report, but I will just present some of the major broad results that came out of the survey. Now, regarding awareness of the CFTA, how aware is the private sector about the CFTA? And you can see that, looking at the charts, you can see that this private sector in the East African community is has very low to moderate awareness of the CFTA. Only about 14% of the private sector have a high of, if you combine high and fully aware, only about 14% of the private sector in the East African community have a high awareness of the CFTA. So this is a problem. This is a problem for the implementation of the CFTA, and we have to find a solution for this. Next slide, please. So regarding the awareness of the CFTA opportunities. So it looks like the private sector is aware of the opportunities. Increased market size, 82% were aware that the CFTA would create opportunities. They were aware that 52% were aware that the CFTA would reduce the costs of doing business. 51% were aware that the CFTA would increase economies of scale. So it looks like while the private sector is aware of the CFTA opportunities, they're aware of the CFTA opportunities, but what is missing is the knowledge on the processes of the CFTA. How do they take advantage of the CFTA? And I think this is where we have got to target our awareness programs, especially the processes, what is involved in the rules of origin, what constitutes, what is termed as a good that is produced in an EAC country. So this is where we have to target our campaigns, not on the opportunities of the CFTA, but the processes that the private sector has to go through in order to take advantage of the CFTA. Next slide, please. Now, there was another question that asked the private sector some of the anticipated challenges about the implementation of the CFTA. And the number one anticipated challenge in the implementation of the CFTA was the low political will. 56% of the respondents in East Africa identified low political will as an anticipated challenge. Expected protectionism, 50% anticipated protectionism as a challenge. And then the delays in finalizing negotiations, 39% identified that as a challenge, and then low productive capacity, 39%. But what does this tell us? This tells us that the private sector is looking at the previous regional economic trade agreements that we have signed, and they have identified some of the problems that they have observed, and they're worried that the problems that they have observed in the regional economic communities will transfer to the CFTA. So how does the private sector want to engage in the CFTA implementation? How does the private sector, what role does the private sector want to take in the CFTA implementation? So 81% of the private sector say that they want an active involvement in the negotiation process. 74% say they want training sessions on the CFTA protocols. And then 55% say they want representation through the Apex bodies, Apex private sector bodies. And 51% say they want representation through the national ministries of trade. Now, like I was saying earlier, all these are processes. While the private sector is familiar with the opportunities and benefits of the CFTA, what they're not very familiar about is the processes and the protocols that are involved in the CFTA. So that brings me to the end of some of the findings from the survey. My last section is just on the recommendations and conclusions from the survey. There's several recommendations in the survey. I just highlighted some of the main, what I thought were the main recommendations. One of them was rolling out sensitization campaigns on the CFTA. And like I said, the sensitization campaigns have to be targeted mainly to the processes of the CFTA. Secondly, the second recommendation from the survey was fast-tracking the negotiations. A third recommendation was ensuring the full commitment and strong political will in order to effectively drive the implementation process. The private sector is worried that the lack of the political will may affect the CFTA implementation negatively. The fourth point is that the private sector wants support, particularly on capacity building in trade finance, business, and business startups to support the small and medium enterprises. And finally, they want the creation of an enabling environment for the use of e-commerce in the EAC. Thank you very much, colleagues. This brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rogers. So this brings some light for our discussion. Many opportunities coming from the AfCFTA, but also some important challenges that need to be discussed to find the best way. So without further ado, let's try to get into this conversation. And I think from Didier, I understand that we are due to end at like in 30 minutes, I think. So I have three panelists. We have three panelists with us this morning. We have, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Carrera from the EABC, Vice Chair, I understand. We have also
yes,
Mr.
please. I'm here.
Davilin. Okay, thank you very much for being with us. We have Mr. Davilin from KEPSA, and we have Mr. Asimwe from the Private Sector Federation of Uganda. Welcome to the three of you, and we'd like to have your views on some of these challenges and but also opportunities. I would like to start with you, Mr. Denis Carrera. So we've heard that the AfCFTA holds several very good promises, both at the macroeconomic level, but directly also for the private sector, actually. Notably in terms of increased opportunity to trade for the private sector, to invest, to expand business, to reduce transaction costs. It should promote also efficiency gains. Okay? It should allow economies of scales and then improve productivity and competitiveness of the private sector actors. Also, it is expected to improve regional value chains, also more value addition on the continent, and then which all means more profits, more benefits for the private sector directly. So on this, Mr. Karel, I would like to hear from you, what are for you the most promising feature of the agreement and what really needs to be done to make these things happen? Over to you, Mr. Denis Carrera, please.
Thank you very much, Mama Keita. First of all, my pleasure to meet you and your team. I think outside, slightly allow me 1 minute or so, outside the formal discussion we're going to have, it's my biggest pleasure because I've been in East African Business Council for quite some years, and I have seen it all. I've seen the challenges of walking the talk, which is a key subject, a big subject in what we're going to discuss. For agreements to be discussed and for agreements to be discussed, what works and what doesn't, where is the challenge? That's a very big, and so I'm glad that I'm meeting you now, and I would like that going forward, we meet many more times, because I think, as alluded to by Dr. Mukwaya, one of the key things we will need to do as the technicians, so to say, in the implementation of this agreement is the sensitization process and ways of overcoming the challenges, because that will stand in our way, although we know globally that AfCFTA presents more opportunities than challenges. So I'm glad to meet you and team, and I request that please double up the effort, double up the resources, and we get involved in this process. Believe me not, if we don't get this bull by the horns, we'll end up very good speakers, very good speeches, very good sessions, and good debaters, but implementation will not be there. And at the end of the day, when you measure what CFTA means to the local SME person in one of the districts of Rwanda, you will find zero, and zero awareness, zero benefit. But in terms of speeches, when we meet at Convention Center, we are good to present these speeches. So this is where I really want you and your bureau to come in and work strongly and steadily with us in East African Business Council, and we make this work, we make this tangible. We push for, we walk the talk, we say things and we follow up and make sure these things are done. That is one. The other one, let me also touch on a few things that picking from my experience as having led the East African Business Council. East African Business Council sometimes works in an interesting way. A chairman becomes a vice chairman, and that's how it rotates over the years. It's nothing strange to us. But the one thing that I came across that can be a challenge is for member states, in this case it will be continental, to speak one language. The absence of one language is always a problem. Or speaking one language in the formal setting, and when you part ways, the story becomes different. That's something to discuss intensely, and we know what to do. The other one is what I said of walking the talk, that what we say and what the politicians say, and I want to marry this with the political will, which Mukwaya also pointed out as one of the challenges. Shall we have the political will across board? And if it is not there, what are we going to do? Because we shall meet protectionism, a lot of protectionism. We have met this in EABC. We agree on a specific thing during a forum in Arusha, and we travel to our capital cities, and things change in 2 days. In 2 days, the story changes completely, including stories like a railway line designated to move from Mombasa to Kigali. By the time you reach Kigali, the line is not going there anymore. So that's a problem. We'll need to look at some of those things, the political compliance from different member states on board. Then let's just also, the other thing, important thing is for countries across the continent to know that CFTA is not simply go and take out something. Because we have seen this in EABC, that member states sometimes will say, no, in this framework, I will get this and this and this. But it is steps that I will get. There's usually nothing to say, I will also part with this and this and that and that. So when it becomes a game of we shall get and get, and by the way, recall that at the signing of the CFTA, some countries delayed to ratify because I met manufacturers from Nigeria, for example, and they were holding back because they were worried that CFTA may take away more of their chances in manufacturing, and their goods may not have good market because they will be out-competed across the continent. But so they are looking at what they take from CFTA, not what they bring in. So we need to sensitize Africans to look at CFTA as something, you bring in something, but you also part with something. You can't have it all by yourself. Then harmonizing positions and visions on our part as regional trade blocks is extremely important. Harmonizing positions, don't be surprised that we may be bogged down by disagreements between ourselves. Yet we are looking at how best do we tap into the opportunities, but we get bogged down by disagreements and we never move at all. And we have also seen this, by the way. These are real examples, and I will be glad to share our experiences from East African Business Council to show where you end up getting lost in disagreements when there's an opportunity presenting itself for earning, to make both of you earn, or the three of you or the five of you make a significant earning, but you get stuck in disagreements, and projects never take off. So now going back to but the last one there is, I think, protection NTBs. We have dealt with over 175 NTBs in East African Business Council. I can only imagine that across the continent we shall have possibly, if one region had 175, multiply by 8. So we probably, because I see about 8 regional blocks in the continent, we probably will have about 700 non-tariff barriers. How are we going to deal with those? So the levels of engagement are going to be critical. And that's why I started by calling on the serious involvement of the ECA on how to spot out the NTBs good enough, in good time, and then we address them head on. Of course, we will still meet challenges because you solve one NTB and one gets born the next day, because there are people who benefit from NTBs, and all these expectations that we should be seeing in future. But now, speaking specifically at your point, interestingly, Mukwaya covered most of what I wanted to say. But what really are we not seeing as coming forward with SEFTA? The job opportunities that come with this thing. Look at how many jobs we are looking at creating, both for the youth and for the middle class. So several jobs are going to be created over I think about 2 million jobs are expected under CFTA on the continent coming soon. So we need, I think, to fast track CFTA so that we create jobs for our people. Value chains, which Mukwaya talked about, we need to expand African value chains, because That's where we have had the weakest points. And yet, look at where our dollars are spent currently. The vast majority of our dollars from the continent is spent in Asia, both in the West and in the East. Today, I don't know if you are aware, I got information yesterday that China, for example, is planning to stop all of us from going there. And they will prefer to have a few Chinese and a few Africans who are based there deal with supply chains for whoever wants to go there, whichever item you want, from whichever part of Africa. Let that item be dealt with by one agent who is in China. So the influx of Africans inside China, which you had made a habit of recent, like we did in Dubai. So we were going east now. You are aware, of course, that Africans were forming groups now to operate business in China. Chinese are saying, no, go home, we shall find you there. Now, this is a phenomenon we need to understand and also tell the Chinese that, okay, stay home, we shall invite you when we need you. And by the way, expect that who is going to be challenging or presenting obstacles to operationalization of CFTA? There are these international huge trade blocs that are going to speak big, influence the actors on the continent to serve the interests of those other bigger economies out there. So we need to be smart and look into these things, employ our people in significant numbers. They take over the jobs that foreigners would otherwise be coming to take, non-Africans would be coming to take, and we tap into this. The other one, of course, is increased economic growth. This is we did not to dwell much on this. We know how much CFTA is going to improve our economies. Picking from what Mkhaya also said, our regional economies will expand by, I think, 0.7%, which is phenomenal if we can get it done. Industrialization. Look at the levels of industrialization. Look at what items do we look for as Africans. What items are we going to look for? Let me pick on two. Motor vehicle industry. How many Africans are heading outside to buy vehicles from outside, or how many African plants are actually assembling vehicles? Currently, we know that Ethiopia is doing that, South Africa is doing that, and a few other countries, trying assembling here and there. But we need to move into the automobile industry and own it completely. Why shouldn't we be exporting the many vehicles that we go to pick from outside of the continent? So the influx of automobile from the Middle East, from the USA, from other countries, we should turn this and reverse it. Please alert me if my time goes bad. I tend to speak a lot when I open up to AfCFTA, because I find it the most exciting opportunity, but we shall fail ourselves if we don't be focused. The other one, of course, we got a ready viable market for ourselves. Look at the capacity of Africans to consume. Today's, I don't want to go deep into so many figures. We can find time for this. But look at the magnitude of container handling at the African import ports. Run from the northern part of Africa, along the coast of Africa in the north, along the Indian Ocean, and along the West Africa, DRC, Angola, down there. Look at how many containers are landing. Compare those with how many containers are actually departing from Africa. There's a lot of inequality, and our containers, interestingly, we are expecting the raw material. Now, why don't we keep this raw material here, develop infrastructure, develop industry, and instead we are exporting the same finished product? So these are things we need to sit down and discuss that are presented by AfCFTA. Now, investment, in terms of investment, look at how many opportunities today we are attracting Westerners, Chinese for on the continent. Believe me, I have moved almost to 3/4 of the African countries. Everywhere, every capital city you visit, they're telling you we have Chinese investors coming in. And my question to heads of state, to different officials is always one: how many Africans are going out there to invest in China? How many concessions have we given? Let me pick an example in mining, for example. I've been wondering or so disturbed by how many concessions we are giving to Chinese, Russians, who, for mining, even in East Africa here. I have been asking several questions. Why can't I go to California as me or my company from Rwanda? Why don't we get invited to California and we're going to start mining next week? For sure, if an American came here, he will get a license in 1 week and he will start mining in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in 1 week. He will start mining. Can I do the same? Can I have the same treatment in California? Can we as Africans move as a group and start up a mining plant somewhere in Guangzhou, in one of those mountains? Is it possible? Is it workable? So how do we make it so simple for other people to come to invest here? So why don't we transform ourselves into investment vehicles, African investment vehicles, to target, to invest in those groups? Or at least, worst case, let's invest both ways as partners. You know, because that SCFTA also gives us leverage to speak with a solid voice out there. Am I still good with time?
Thank you very much. This is very, very interesting. Let us hear from the other panelists as well, and then we'll come back to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kanga. Thank you. This is very useful. So I would like now to turn to Mr. Davile from KEPSA, who I understand is policy analyst, compliance. And Mr. Carrera has raised very, 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 very important, pertinent issues, notably the issue of the fear to see protectionism, the many, many, many non-tariff barriers that that exist, the regulatory context or framework that exists that are making that FDIs are more coming in Africa rather than going. So I would like to have your perception on these issues. What are the main fears of the private sector community if you have this information, and what needs to be done? He mentioned the fear of competition that may be unbalanced and not in favor of the private sector community in Africa. He mentioned that, for instance, in Nigeria, the private sector was really afraid to lose some business or some opportunity, some shares of the market. What do you think, and what needs to be done, and who need to do that? Over to you, Mr. Davide Busuru.
Thank you, Dr. Keita, and thank you, Mr. Carrera, for a very elaborate presentation, and especially capturing quite a lot of issues that are being faced in Africa. I would like to start by saying that the first thing we need to do is we need to first think Africa first. We need to start thinking of ourselves in order to develop and improve ourselves. Many a times that we've been configuring or wired to improve the environment for others and not thinking about ourselves. So you find it easy for, in the case of Kenya, for a foreigner to come and pitch tent in Kenya than it is for a Kenyan to establish an industry in Kenya. So I kind of agree with Mr. Carrera that this issue of protectionism, we can easily tackle the issue of protectionism, the issue of NTBs, and the issue of having outbound FDI by trying and understanding that the opportunities that exist internally or within the region are first for us. We need to tap this one. These are the kind of low-hanging fruits that we need to take advantage of. Just to tie it to what Dr. Mkwaya's presentation, because he had sort of an elaborate analysis of some of the issues from the perception survey, and you realize that one of the things that is being raised is the understanding of the private sector of the CFTA. So, and by this I mean, as he elaborated, that there is a knowledge gap. Yes, we know that we have the CFTA amongst us, but the private sector is yet to understand the nitty-gritties of these kind of opportunities that we need or are present for us. So this is upon us, policymakers and all concerned parties, the development partners like yourself, to try and look how do we unpack this kind of agreement for a clear understanding by a common trader, a common business person, that it's not in the language that it is currently, but very understandable. How do we synthesize this to make it easy for us from the private sector to understand it and take advantage of it? We know we gave our wish list on what kind of proposals that we needed to be reflected in sort of the negotiations, be it in the rules of origin. But do we understand now what does these rules entail for us? What kind of steps do we need to take advantage of these rules? So we need to run sort of like why I put it, is it capacity building, be it sensitization to the private sector and the people at large. And just to touch on a point, you realize that the SMEs form a very critical mass of the private sector. 80% of the private sector is SMEs. If you're struggling with the issues of employment, I know each country in the region has a youthful population, and one of the objectives we want to see is how do we create more employment? How do we engage this youth into meaningful engagements that are able, to improve their quality of life? And this will get us back to SMEs. You understand that these SMEs, they don't have the kind of privilege and advantage some of the large firms have. The large firms have the advantage of, they have the resources wherewithal they can employ people that can synthesize, they can break down the CFTA for the understanding on how they can take advantage of it. However, the SMEs, on the other side, they lack these resources. They are not aware on how to engage even through the BMOs such as KEPSA and EABC. So it's upon us to try and see how do we make things easy for them, even as we think of tackling this kind of predisposing challenges that we know that will come along, such as NTBs. As Pereira said, within the EAC, the NTBs has been an issue, it continues to be an issue. And just within the EAC, if we could have recorded about 175, then the multiplier effect within the CFTA is very high. You are going to have quite a number of issues in the line of NTBs. Most of these, yes, they affect the large farms and together the SMEs, but how do we then make it easy for them to be able to trade and take advantage of now the opportunities? And I will sum up by saying that besides unpacking this treaty, synthesizing it, breaking it down for them, we need to do a sector profiling of the opportunities down to each sector, not generic profiling of opportunities, so that everybody who wants to take advantage of these opportunities is able to do it in an easy manner. And then we can use such vehicles as trade fairs, such trainings that we're having like this one to sensitize, do more campaigns and a lot of things. I remember when we started the EAC, quite a number of people did not know what is involved in it, but we had to come up with sort of frameworks, both from the private sector and the public sector, that could then rope in some of these critical mass to understand what kind of opportunities that are available. And within these kind of areas, you'll also understand that you are able to get input on kind of challenges they are facing individually at sector level or be it industry level or farm level, and some of very practical recommendations that can be used to kind of address this kind of issues. So also one suggestion is either having sort of a information desk, inquiry points where if it's, for example, through a business member organization or apex body that are existing, let's have sort of information desk or inquiry points that individuals, traders can call on for information, and if they are stuck, and just know how to maneuver within this argument. With that, I would say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Keita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busuru. Thank you very much. This is very insightful as well. You ended with an information desk to be very, very concrete in terms of helping the private sector. You said that we need to do a sector profiling to really be able to catch all peculiarity, pertaining to each sector. You need to emphasize on the need also to put a special focus on the SMEs for whom problems are different from other actors of the business community. You also started with Africa first. Africa needs to be presented with all the opportunities and to be how can I say, let's say capacity need to be built in order to reap those benefits. Very interesting, very insightful. Thank you very much. I would like now to turn to our third panelist, who is coming from the private sector of Uganda, Mr. Asi Imwe. Are you with us? And if yes, I would like to also hear from you after what we have heard, still in the same vein, what needs to be done to better engage the private sector, and yes, what kind of mechanism we could consider in order to build the capacities, to improve the understanding of what needs to be known around the AfCFTA, and for also the private sector to take action. Mr. Carrera said that many actors are really sitting back and waiting for what do I gain? But the question should start with what do I do to gain something, right? So what kind of engagement we could consider? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keita, and good morning to all of the participants. And thank you, Mr. Carrera, Mr. Busuru, Mr. Dr. Mkwaya, and everybody. I think that a lot has been said, pretty much building a very strong foundation for this discussion, and it's very insightful, obviously. And but let me just pretty much give some context to this SEFTA. I think it's important to realize that this is the second revolution for SEFTA. For thousands of years, we had one big continent called Africa. We traded with each other. We didn't have any boundaries. Obviously, we had kingdoms and all sorts of territories. But on the onset of colonialism, all these lines were drawn, and we unfortunately have found ourselves in a situation where we all have. I come from Uganda, and I represent the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. But I'll tell you that on every border of Uganda, we have one same group of people from one side and one same group from another side, to the point that we speak the same language, but we have different nationalities. So unfortunately, we have to redraw the lines and almost recreate what our forefathers did hundreds of years ago. So that's one thing. Two, because of that effect of colonialism, we've had very, very strong mindsets, to the point that, for instance, we speak the same local languages, but we speak a second language. One group speaks French, another group speaks English, and all of these things have had a really tough challenge on us from the point that now we have got stereotypes. The third thing that I wanted to build on is the fact that we find ourselves in a very, very precarious situation. And I think Mr. Carrera mentioned it, of where we think our solution lies outside there. We have to bring in Asian investors, American investors to do the same thing we could have done here. And yet the real solutions and answers lie with us. The fourth thing I thought I needed to build on is that in 2021, Africa has recorded the highest number of PhDs, master's degrees, the highest number of educational institutions. We have never been better educated than before. So we have a very, very powerful professional constituency. We have 600 million young, versatile, energetic people, very creative. So the thing we need to work on very, very quickly as a continent is the issue of mindset. We have to believe in ourselves, that we can do these things, that we have the capacity, we even have resources within ourselves, and all we need to do is just to build confidence. So with that said, allow me, Dr. Keita, just to suggest that a lot of the things you have asked really have been answered. But one of the things I think we need to do very quickly as partner states is to ensure that we work on the competitiveness of the private sector. Now, private sector needs to start to talk to each other. And I want to applaud the East African Business Council, because it's the apex body of all the Eastern African private sector groups. So we need to start to talk to each other. And by talking to each other is coming directly, physically, and of course nowadays we have to do what we are right now doing is the element of a discussion which is frank, which is decisive, but it has to be a business type of discussion. Just last week, the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda with a team was in Kenya to discuss with our brothers, and we actually had a lot of almost suspicion of each other. The Ugandans suspected the Kenyans were suspecting. But when we sat together, we actually found we just had stereotypes. We just had things that were almost of suspicious nature. But by coming together and having a frank discussion, and we had traveled with both government and departments and agencies of different sectors, sitting together for 2 days, by the end of the meeting, we actually came out with solutions. So the solutions lie with us in the private sector. We sat concisely with the government players, and we told them that the government needs to create an enabling environment for us to do business. When that enabling environment is provided, then the cost of doing business comes down. So first and foremost, private sector needs to get with the private sector in other countries, because we have the solutions, we have that capacity. Now, the second issue is that we need to be heavily involved in the trade negotiations, especially things to do with the customs union. We need to discuss frankly and with real and open heart on the issue of non-tariff barriers. I think that has been discussed, but clearly, I think for the last couple of years, there has not been as much capacity engagement of the private sector as possible. So if that can happen, and that discussion needs to be taken to the forefront, it will help us. The third one, of course, is the issue of infrastructure. For a long time, I think this is an area that has not been really worked on, but looking at the figures that have been done lately, we need to really start putting a lot of investment and discussion on our roads, our intra-African connecting roads, our water, our air transport, our railway system, our telecommunication system needs to be really reinforced. I'll give you a very interesting example. The distance from Entebbe to Kigali, for instance, is about the same distance from Paris to London. But the cost of flying between Entebbe and Kigali and vice versa is almost 3 or 4 times the cost of flying from Paris to London. So technically, we need to have a discussion on the open skies and see how do we bolster our regional and continental infrastructure. The day we finish with the railway system, the day we fix our water networks, the day we fix our road networks, the cost of doing business, efficiency, capacity to connect with each other. And that comes with all sorts of benefits, travel, tourism, connectivity, all that will really resonate in the success of the AfCFTA. The other issue I think which is very critical in terms of this discussion is the development of dispute conflict resolution mechanisms, especially to address the NTBs and conflicts around the partner states. We talked about political will. So once we can bolster that side of things, and that's where EABC comes in, and the regional forums that can help this discussion, obviously, I think it will help us. And then, of course, the other one is the focusing on business linkages within the partner states, so that we cater for the interests of the people and the business communities. And I think that our group and support Apex body discussions, KEPSA, RDB, Tanzania private sector engagements, and all these platforms would be very good. I thought it would be very interesting. I think Mr. Carrera pointed about it. Let me just probably discuss something on the issue of the African diaspora. It is estimated that the African diaspora is in the double-digit GDP. That is an area we have not really discussed very well. I think that if we re-engage the African diaspora, especially in Europe and America, that would create a special purpose vehicle for investment. I also know that the African American constituency is very big. I think in the last statistics, I think it's been said that the African American GDP is close to $1 trillion. Now, I think in 2019, it is said that it was exactly 400 years since the Africans were taken to the American coast as slaves, etc. But there is a new thinking. There's a shift in the African American constituency. The need to come and invest in Africa. Is it possible? Isn't it about time that we start to engage with our brothers and sisters across on the other side of the Atlantic? That there should be new ways, new strategic, creative, innovative ways of having to bring in some new thinking, new actors, new players on this discussion. And I think that the areas of engagement are big. So we need to start thinking about things like health tourism. We're sending so many of our people to India and China and Thailand, and Europe for treatment. Why don't we get first-class hospitals and health facilities here? We have so many PhDs that are capable of doing that. Intra-African travel tourism, which is very close to my heart. I'm former CEO of the Uganda Tourism Board. I know that if we have so many Africans flying, across to other places when we have this kind of thing. Universities, entertainment industry, the arts. So for me, those are things that I think that can be added on the agenda. And this morning's discussion for me provided both a learning, but also a time of engagement. And so I thank you very much. That's for my contribution right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asimwe. Again, a great contribution for you, starting with really the need to change the mindset and think that everything is possible, to build confidence. From there, we go to building trust among the private sector community, between the private sector community and also the decision makers in public administration. So these are really insightful. And so conversation need to start, need to continue. It should be extended to the diaspora community, a very important potential for investment in our countries, potential also to bring some new know-how, innovative ways of working and of producing wealth. So this is really very interesting. Before we go to the last part of the program, I think we have heard from very three insightful panelists here. any of you, would you like to say a last word? Mr. Carrera, I think that, I don't know if you were done with what you wanted to share, or if you want to say something in half a minute. Same for Mr. Busuru, and of course, for the third panelist, Mr. Asimwe. Would you like to say something before we close?
Sure. Yes. I wish you had more than 1 second, but the last my colleague from Kampala said one important thing as he started his submission, that African was one initially before elements from out there came to draw borders. So the lines of called borders were drawn by them, and just for us to remain alive to the fact that those same people are still now very much alive. They have much deeper interests. They want to divide us much more. And if they fail to do that peacefully, they will create conflict so that you are divided. So let's be aware of that every time. Those same people are still very active today. They want your resources much more. They want to divide you much more. If they can't do it peacefully, they will do it by conflict. So let's be alive to that fact. Two, Busulu, I think, no, Asimwe, mentions a critical thing. In my notes, I had labeled it the elephant in the house, the infrastructure issue. The opening of this continent will only be achieved by the success in the infrastructure sector, by road, by railway, by water, by air, liberalizing airspace, and by opening up our area networks. These are critical. Of course, these are heavily involved in, they have heavy involvement of governments. And I would rather we now get together, and I request Dr. Mama Keita that put us together and we form groups of advocacy to push for governments to start with, among other things, critical things, the key infrastructure crossing the continent north to south, west to east. And we can do this, and this is achievable. All these guys coming from the Asia, coming from the America, coming from where? The West, whoever wants to come with us, let us put conditions, initial contracts, do 3 key roads on this continent, Alexandria to Cape Town, across West Africa to Addis Ababa. Let's start there. And you see, now let's liberalize our space, airspace. We have spoken this language in East Africa, incidentally. For the last 7 years, we've been speaking about liberalizing airspace of the East African continent. It has not been possible. So now we need that area opened, infrastructure. So there are key subjects, I think, or critical areas that we need to put together and put to governments, to heads of governments, and gladly, for example, East African Business Council, we have this forum where we engage the heads of government, the heads of state of the region, and we carry one package and we present it to them. So this is one of the things I think we should. Infrastructure will be key and critical in opening up the continent. Of course, the last one I said is the rolling out of sensitization programs so that the common person understands this thing called CFTA. Believe me, even EABC, much as it has been here now for close to 20 years, some people don't know about it. Because some choose not to know about it, some don't think it is beneficial to them. But I want to believe that if we open up the continent, people will want to go beyond the borders because the market is opening up anyway. So sensitization should be, in fact, let me conclude with this statement that Dr. Keita, I don't know what your strategic plan is, but in my view, it should primarily focus with working with the national focal points and regional trade bodies to sensitize the public on the benefits of this thing. Most of your budget, I think, should be concentrated in that area. I thank you.
Thank you very much. This is quite an agenda for us. Mr. Busuru, what is your last word here?
Thank you, Dr. Keita. I think my last sentiments, I want to tie them to the issue that my colleague from Uganda has raised, competitiveness in the region. Then in line with also outside competition, because we cannot be blind of outside competition, even internally as the EAC region, we cannot just ignore the competition coming from other regions. And saying so, I want my last statement is on productive integration. As a region, as EAC region, we are superstars in the regional integration. If you look at the Africa Regional Integration Index, we are high performers in terms of integration, and it's not a secret. However, there is an issue that if you look at the index carefully, that we appear to be laggards in the productive integration. And by productive integration, I think we mean producing, that is producing goods and services in a most efficient and effective way. My point is, if you look at Dr. Muhwaya's presentation, he picked one of the challenges that SMEs are facing, which, if you remember, I mentioned that this is a critical mass in the private sector because it accounts for 80% of the private sector. One of the challenges they are facing is a lack of production capacities, productive capacity, that is. If you tie it to his sentiments that one of the areas that we need to improve to increase market access is to focus on manufacturing. So this means that productive integration is very critical for us as a region. Kenya ranks position 7 with a score of 0.29 out of 1. Uganda follows at position 18 with a score of 0.217. So what I mean is, as we think of this, we need to understand that we need to increase our
Is it only me or we cannot hear him?
Even me, I lost him.
We have lost him.
Yeah, I've lost him.
Okay, so maybe in the interest of time, we hear from Mr. Asimwe. What is your last word in this conversation for today?
to facilitators. Are we accessing electricity at a cheaper cost? Hello?
Yeah, we lost you, but please proceed, Mr. Busuru. Yeah.
All right, sorry for that. What I'm just saying is that we need to put emphasis on production, productive competitiveness. We need to make it easier, cheaper, less costly, and more efficient for the private sector to produce, for us to remain competitive. And if you are to talk of integrating regional value chains, I know we can only do so if we are competitive. If our SMEs in the region are competitive, then it's very easy for them to be integrated in the regional value chains. Dr. Keita, I will rest it at that point unless there's any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busuru. Thank you very much. And then now, Mr. Asimwe, please. What would you like to say? Some last thing before we conclude for today's conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Keita. I think for me, today's conversation is a plus in this whole discourse about SEFTA. My emphasis really would be that let the private sector start talking to each other. We are the guys in the business, we raise capital, we employ people, we pay taxes, we are the people who face challenges. So we should be on top of the agenda. Every time a government delegation is meeting another one, let the private sector be involved. Let their voice be heard. Let their input be felt. Let us be we have the East African community. We have the East African Legislative Assembly. We have all these protocols of IGAD and COMESA. It's all government. we wish that private sector have a very, very strong seat at these meetings, at these negotiations. I've been in government, I know how government thinks. I've been in private sector, I know how they think. I'm a private sector player. If this conversation was heard by, I wish this recording could be heard by the people who make decisions. The people who make decisions are politicians. They are the government players. So can we have a bilateral, a tripartite discussion as much as possible? Let our input be felt. Let it be heard in these outcomes of the protocols. Let's really take these issues on top of the agenda. Once we do that, then it will be felt. Then number two is, I think Dr. Mukwaya put it very well, 80+% of the main players in our region are really SMEs. Let this message get down to them. One of the things, of course, is that further down as you go, the large players are very, very versatile. They are well informed. They are well equipped. They are, very good platforms and foundations. I think that the SMEs are still incapacitated in terms of information, in terms of tools, in terms of skilling, in terms of standards, in terms of awareness, in terms of even getting them to know what's happening beyond the borders. And so I think that information gap, that capacity gap, that awareness gap needs to be taken down, because ultimately they are the engines of this AfCFTA. And I think we need to learn from our friends in Asia. Again, there's no harm in learning from the best. If you look at the industry in India, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, the big players, how the big industries emerged. Even, by the way, in Europe and America, the Industrial Revolution wasn't started by big players. It was started by small and medium enterprises. So we need to find a mechanism of engaging with these people. Fortunately, Africa has one of the largest, and East Africa for that matter, it's the biggest connectivity in terms of radio. We have very, very good radio stations that can reach these people with information. And now, of course, the young people are very versatile in terms of connectivity, on being on WhatsApp, on a lot of these social media handles and platforms. Let's get information, awareness, involvement. Let's go into this thing fully together, and then we pray that it will be very successful. And it was a pleasure meeting you guys, and thank you so much for this initiative. Let the conversation continue. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. On this note, I would like really to thank all our panelists. Very insightful, very important issues raised here. Just a few of them that are new, that were not mentioned before, is the threat or the risk of conflict due to the many opportunities that are in the continent. So indeed, African countries need to remain together to protect and to preserve and to reap the benefit of all these opportunities and wealth that are there. Again, to stay together, private sector to be talking to each other, and also to be talking to government decision makers. This is really important. Also, discussion need to really be how do I say that, to be more specialized. There are several issues. This issue, critical issue of infrastructure and connectivity, this need to be addressed and to be put on the top of the agenda of African countries if we really want to get the most of the opportunities that are in there. So this is well taken as well. Productive integration, competitiveness. Yes, linking more the economies, the sectors. This is very important as well. Engaging the SMEs, they are at the core of wealth creation in our economies, 80% of GDPs creation. So it is really important to engage with them very specifically and to make their voice heard. Let me stop here in terms of summarizing what has been said, but conversation to be continued indeed. My brother John Bosco Kalisa, as I have the floor, let me, this will be my concluding remarks here, to thank everyone, to thank and appreciate this very good partnership with EABC, and to be continued, hopefully. Thank you very much to all our our panelists, and a round of applause wherever you are. I cannot see you, but please applaud them. And I give the floor now to our co-convener, Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, before we conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Is he there? Or I see a hand. Huh? I see a hand from Didier. Comment on a prévu ça? Do we have a Q&A? I see a hand from Junior.
Sure, I think we can maybe take 5 minutes if you allow for any contribution that also participants can bring to this conversation. So we can take about 5 minutes. We did not plan to make it a long webinar, but any contribution is welcome. So Junior Lesanjo, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mama Keita and Didier, for the opportunity. I think it was a very good presentation made by Dr. Rogers. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Proceed.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I just wanted to make a quick comment based on a lot has been said by the panelists, and I think they have narrowed it very down. My opening statement would be the FTA, now that even Tanzania, now that you have rectified it, could be a blessing, but could be also a curse in disguise. So it's something that we need to watch out as we go forward. And why am I saying this? There's something called spider web economics. And this is kind of, this has been applied mostly in Asian countries. You speak of Chinese, as a fellow panelist was speaking. Chinese and Indians have a custom that wherever they go in any country, for example, if it is America or it is in Tanzania, what they always do is that when they reach and they want to buy any goods in terms of could be personal use, households, or any other business kind of goods, they would prefer going more Chinese like them. For example, if they want to eat, they'll go into a restaurant of a Chinese so that they could support the businesses to go forward. Likewise, Indians, wherever you go, if it's going to do a shopping, they would prefer doing a shopping to an Indian shop. And this is not something that we as Africans have as a culture. European bloc trades 69% of the trade of the European bloc. They trade amongst each other. And then the remaining 32, around 31%, this is where now they allow African countries, you know, America and other blocs to export to them. So I think with this mentality and perception, if now, and I think this involves perception and change, mindset changing, this could support us in terms of, and we could see the benefits of FTA. So I believe we need to look at it in a very different way, because you'll find most African countries would prefer trading more with, currently as I'm speaking, I'll just give an example. Burundi, they're currently exporting around, I think around, I don't remember the right figure, but a lot of meat from China, if I'm not mistaken. And then, but cow meat, basically. But if you come to Tanzania, we are currently the second largest we have the largest population of cows in Africa after Ethiopia. Likewise, Ethiopia is currently leading. Now you ask yourself a question: why wouldn't Burundi go and buy cow meat from Ethiopia, or buy cow meat from Tanzania, so that we could support our bloc and enhance our trade and our intertrade? But they will prefer more exporting things, importing things outside the bloc. So I think there is a need of a mindset changing. And if we don't bring this as Africans, I don't think even the AfTA would help us to succeed in terms of bringing more incomes amongst the African countries, but even impact to the whole bloc. I think this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Very, very interesting contribution, Junior. Thank you very much. I think this is also in the area of information sharing more. And yes, I'm sure that you guys from the private sector if you are aware of an opportunity and you are convinced about it, you will go for it. So we need to work a lot in terms of inform the private sector where are the opportunities and how can be they can be optimized actually. So thank you very much for this let's say comments or reflection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think on behalf of East African Business Council, Mr. Carrera is going to do the closing remarks. He's the Vice Chairman of the EABC. But also it goes almost without saying that ECA and the EABC, they stand ready to provide all necessary support to the private sector to make the CFTA a reality. So collectively, I think we can ensure that CFTA is effectively implemented for the benefit of the whole of Africa. So, Mr. Carrera, you have the floor just for the closing remarks on behalf of the EABC.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, everyone. Glad to meet most of you. With Didier, Habimana, I didn't know about you. Keita, you are in. Meet you. Let me start by making an invitation that can we even meet informally, and we depart from the formal setting, and through these informal settings, since you are here, we can discuss a lot more. And since I am the focal point of the East African Business Council for CFTA, there will be a lot more to share from the organization as EABC with CFTA. The second thing is that EABC happens to be a bit more organized than most of the trade blocs on the continent. I stand corrected to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think that's where we are. We have one thing that Africa is rich with, and I think all my colleagues alluded to it. One thing we are rich at currently is professional knowledge. Several PhDs, several master's degrees, several other qualifications. So the one thing we are not short of is professional understanding. No, we have a lot of this, but we don't make good use of it. So I think what EABC will be looking at is to tap into the regional professional expertise and sharing it with ECA so that we put it on the table for consumption of this continent. EABC stands ready to work with ECA. We need to identify key critical wins. In my notes, and I put down, those of you who have worked with me know how I work. I'm a doer. I'm not just a talker. I'm a doer, and if I don't count the wins, like counting them achievable, 1, 2, 3, 4 have been achieved. Let's go to the next page. Then we become good talkers, and that's not our purpose really. So I think let's be result-oriented. Let's be doers. Let's identify quick wins, because there's a whole wide range of things to address in the commencement of the CFTA and getting everybody on board and getting everybody understand it and involved. But which ones do we start with? So can we list down the quick wins list or quick wins collection of quick wins ideas and aspects from different parts? Then we say, okay, let's start with this. These are immediate, these are midterm, these are the long term. Infrastructure, as I said, comes first, in my view. Airspace, these are things that immediate wins. And as I pointed out in my earlier remarks, we have talked a lot about opening up airspace in East Africa, and it's become difficult to an extent that in the last conversation I had with my colleagues at EABC, with my chairman, and we're meeting one of the heads of state, the President Kagame in Rwanda here, we said, actually, if we cannot open up the airspace in East Africa, let's push for the opening up of the continental airspace. And then the East African airspace becomes irrelevant. I think these are some of the things we need, the approaches we need to look at very pragmatically, very objectively, and do away with politicization of the chances presented and the opportunities presented by AfCFTA. So we stand ready. ECA, we stand ready to work with you. And may I take this opportunity to suggest that please, ECA, look into where resources will be available, call all of us in our big numbers, invite us to convention center. Since I'm here, let me have the benefit of suggesting the venue closest to me, come to Convention Center in Kigali in slightly bigger numbers, and let this conversation we've had be carried forward to a bigger group, as my colleague suggested. So we invite the private sector of the region and beyond, other continents that can send delegates here, and we organize a much bigger forum, which gets the ball going in terms of sensitization. I thank you very much, and again, EABC will forever work for the success of CFTA in the broader sense. Thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone. Very thank you to our distinguished panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are closing right now this conversation, but like it was said, the conversation to be carried forward. So because the CFTA will build bridges that will bind us more and deliver jobs and prosperity for our citizens. We thank you very much for coming up, and like it was suggested and requested, we will share the presentations and also the recording of this webinar. So have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you all. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.